This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, we're going to be talking with a gentleman that is very well versed in something that is ubiquitous to the big lake, Lake Superior, as also the other Great Lakes in our region and many inland areas, and that is eagles. And you kind of encountered this, you encountered our guest not too long ago because you went and visited.
Oh, my goodness. You know, when you're a kayaker in particular, but just walking the beach anywhere, you see eagles. But the opportunity you have when an eagle leads you down the shoreline and you really feel like, you know, so many times in my life, Walt, I say, well, that's my dad.
Yeah.
He's up there kind of saying, okay, around the corner, get ready because the wind's going to pick up or the waves are going to pick up or whatever it might be. But I've always been fascinated. And when you get the opportunity to visit the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, Minnesota, you will be blown away, really. Well, it's amazing.
I'm actually real interested in this conversation because I have a strong connection with eagles, and I'm a big fan of those. Love to see them. I always look at it as a good sign. And joining us now to talk about the National Eagle Center, what they do and what he does, is Ed Hahn, who is Director of Advancement and Marketing Communications with the National Eagle Center. Welcome to the podcast, Ed.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, kind of just a start-off question here. What has brought you over your lifetime path to get you to the National Eagle Center? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got there.
Yeah, well, I wish I had a really spellbinding story to spin for you of how I ended up at the National Eagle Center, but really that was just chance. I was looking for a new position about 11 years ago. I was transferring between jobs, and just so happened that there was an opening at the National Eagle Center for an advancement job, and turns out I didn't get it, but the interview went so well that they had a similar position open literally 2 weeks later, and they called me back and said, hey, would you be interested in this job? And I said, absolutely. So, yeah, I joined the National Eagle Center in the summer of 2015, and I really have never looked back. It's a wonderful place to work. Unlike a lot of the staff that we have here at the center, I really have no formal training in wildlife management or biology or any of that kind of stuff. A lot of them obviously came up through their secondary education, really studying wildlife and things like that to make them obviously be experts in caring for eagles and raptors in general and doing the educational side of things. So everything that I have come to know in my almost 11 years here at the center, I've learned on the job. And in fact, I live and grew up about 30 miles away from the National Eagle Center in Winona, Minnesota, and I had never been to the center prior to interviewing here, which I can certainly relate to a lot of people who come here to visit and say, oh, you know, we live nearby and we've always planned on coming, but we've never been here. And so I can always totally relate to them on that. But, yeah, my background is really marketing and public relations, and that's what I do here at the center. But Yeah, just a fortuitous journey that saw me land where I did here in Wabasha.
Well, the one thing that's good about it is it allows you to tell the story and tell it in a more accessible kind of way. But can you share with us a little bit of the history of the center? What is it? Why is it where it is? A little bit of that, like what is done there?
Yeah, well, I would say the story of the center itself is actually pretty quaint in the sense that it was literally started as a community project. Community members here in Wabasha that had a love for eagles, an interest in eagles, and that passion they had. One thing led to another over several years, and boom, today we have the National Eagle Center. But a lot of times when people come to visit us, they will realize that they are kind of in a very small town here in the middle portion of the country, and they kind of look around and they say, well, gosh, National Eagle Center in Wabasha, Minnesota, why Wabasha of all places? And that really goes back to a period in our history which was very unfortunate for bald eagles, and that was when they were critically endangered back in the second half of the 20th century. So what you had was a period of time, really, from the early 60s, really till about the early 90s, when they were really struggling. The population in North America, or at least in the lower 48 United States, I think at the peak of endangerment was right around 420 active bald eagle nests, which is just absolutely crazy when you consider that today, along the Upper Mississippi Fish and Wildlife Refuge, which runs from here in Wabasha for 261 miles south to Rock Island, Illinois, that has 400 active bald eagle nests today by estimate. So literally, you had an entire nesting population that was less than 500, and that same population is easily matched today along just a portion of the Upper Mississippi River. So during that period of endangerment, you had a lot of people will come to us today and they'll say, I remember when and where I was when I saw my first bald eagle. We were on a family vacation, or we were on the lake, or we were driving, through the mountains or whatever, and we just so happened to see a bald eagle. And so people of a certain age, that older generation, it was a really big deal to see bald eagles. Well, here in Wabasha, the characteristics of the Upper Mississippi are such that it has a very strong current where we sit here in Wabasha. And that means that even during the harshest winter months, there is open water. There's ice-free portions of the river, and because bald eagles are fish eagles, they are water birds, and they're primarily eating fish, that means it's a natural magnet for them during the wintertime. And even today, the Upper Mississippi River region will see hundreds, if not thousands, of migrant bald eagles that come from parts further north, whether that be in northern Minnesota or northern Wisconsin or even up into Canada. If you live on a lake or a river or a reservoir and a winter comes along under typical circumstances, you're suddenly going to be cut off from your food source. And so the people in Wabasha that were watching these eagles during the 70s and 80s, they knew that. And so they were bringing their friends, their family, their colleagues, other bird watchers to Wabasha simply to watch eagles during the winter months, because this was one of the last places you could go in the lower 48 United States and reliably see bald eagles. But you had to come during the wintertime. Several years went by. They hosted kind of these very informal bald eagle viewing weekends right outside where the current National Eagle Center sits, right on the banks of the river. They ended up building this wooden viewing platform where people could come and set up their viewing scopes and stand with their binoculars, things like that. And then in the late 80s and into the early 90s, that group of local Wabasha residents said, hey, we've got something going here. Let's see if we can take it to the next level. And so they incorporated and they created what is the legal entity, the legal name of the National Eagle Center, which is Eagle Watch, Inc. And so they incorporated, I think that was around 1994, and then 5 years later, in 1999, the very first iteration of the National Eagle Center opened in a very small storefront on Main Street. Initially, we didn't have any eagles as part of that, and then very soon after opening, we acquired Harriet, who was the first bald eagle ambassador at the center, and then the rest is history. So we started from a very informal viewing of eagles during the winter time. Then you had people that took interest. Those people banded together, and today you have the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, Minnesota.
Oh, my goodness. When a good idea gets even better.
Yeah.
Wow. That is...
But it really does speak to a very precarious time in our history. So, the story of the National Eagle Center definitely is tied to, the bald eagle was at one time very threatened, very endangered, and so that is a through line in the story of the National Eagle Center.
And you shared with us that now that population is doing really well. We're seeing the resilience of that bird.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if anyone has an actual, specific head count of bald eagles in North America, but over the past several years, I've heard multiple different reports that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service estimates that the North American population of bald eagles is as high as it has ever been, as high as ever been recorded since Europeans arrived on the continent. So really, the species has made a complete and total recovery.
So when you talk about the fact that, like, for generations, and I know for Frida and I know exactly what you're talking about, we didn't see eagles a lot, especially even here along Lake Superior and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We didn't really see them. And now it's not common, like, it's like every day you're going to see one, but it is a little bit more, it's tied into that feel of, wow, okay, these are here and we're seeing them more regularly. Not that it's lost its impact, but that's kind of a good outcome of what you've done with the Eagle Center and with other efforts, right, Ed?
Yeah, I would say you're absolutely correct in that, between generations now, we probably have two generations of Americans now that have grown up where bald eagles were not something that were really necessarily a showstopper in the sense that they were back, for previous generations. And because that population has completely rebounded and is continuing to grow, they are very ubiquitous in a lot of places. In fact, a lot of times we will have guests that come to us from places like the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul here in Minnesota, and they're only about 90 miles away from us. But that's a major metropolitan area. And those people will come here and they'll say, gosh, we didn't used to see bald eagles where I live up in the metro, but, now there's a nest that's in our neighborhood, or, I walk around this lake near my house and I see them there all the time, or I'll see them along the highway when I'm commuting to work in the morning. And so, yeah, absolutely. Now we have a very different experience for Americans who are, growing up today, Americans that have, been born in the last 25 years, certainly. And even in my own experience, I grew up in Winona, Minnesota, which is about 30 miles south of Wabasha, and we've always been on the river. We had lots of lakes in Winona as well, but when I was a kid, really never saw bald eagles ever. And I would say in the last 15 years or so, now I'm seeing them on Lake Winona. There's at least half a dozen of them that are routinely seen there. We know of a few nests in that area around the lakes. And I've even been driving through, downtown Winona and seen eagles soaring overhead. So I have seen that change during my lifetime, where you went from really not seeing bald eagles at all to, seeing them is pretty much an everyday occurrence. And that is a truly incredible accomplishment for Americans to take some pride in. We accomplished that through public action.
Absolutely. And, I have to share that many times you are seeing eagles, but folks don't know how to identify them because that white crown doesn't happen right away. So you're seeing those yearlings perhaps. And, if you could share with us, Ed, a little bit of what that eagle's timeline is before they do get that, ubiquitous crown that we all know. Oh, yeah, that is a bald eagle. But boy, you might be seeing them along that shoreline well before they get that age.
Absolutely. And there's actually another component of that as well, and that is, depending on where you live in the United States and North America, you may have bald eagles and golden eagles living in the same areas year-round. Now, what's interesting about where we are here in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and what is known as the driftless area, we know through recent research and ongoing research that golden eagles are here in this part of the country in the wintertime. And so I'll come back to that in a little while, but basically in a nutshell, they are very similar in appearance to the untrained eye to a juvenile bald eagle. Now, you are absolutely correct. When you have, eaglets hatch in the nest, they grow very quickly. They're as large as their parents at 12 weeks of age by the time they're fledging and leaving the nest. But they don't look like their parents at all. A first-year bald eagle is going to be basically all brown. It's going to have that brown beak. The eyes are brown. Most of the feathers that you're going to see are brown. But one telltale sign is if you happen to see that bird and it's flying and you get a good look at its underside, in a part of the bird called the axillaries, and we kind of also refer to it as the wing pit, but that's where the wing joins the main body. Those are the axillaries, and all of those birds have a telltale white patch of feathers. So if you see that bird in flight and you see that, you can rest assured that you are looking at a juvenile bald eagle or a non-adult bald eagle. Now, what's interesting about the transition is it takes a bald eagle anywhere from 4 to 6 years to really complete that transformation, that transition from the young, juvenile, non-adult plumage to the adult plumage. And what's also interesting is that each individual is kind of on their own timeline. So they could complete that transition in as short as 4 years. Some of them take a little longer, 6 years. So on average, we say it takes about 5 years. But again, it's going to be a gradual transition. And so, year 2 of a bald eagle's life, they might still have mostly that brown beak, probably still have mostly brown eyes. Year 3, okay, they might starting to get some lighter parts of that beak. It starts to turn yellow a little bit. They probably have a decent amount of white coming in on the head. And in the meantime, their whole body goes through these kind of just not random, but they're all individual patterns of this white modeling. And so you truly do, during these formative years, you see some specimens of bald eagle that are truly just stunning birds because, again, all of those plumage patterns are going to be unique to that individual as they go through that transition. And some of them are just absolutely gorgeous to behold. And that's some of the best photography that gets shared with us here at the center from folks around the country is when they see these juvenile eagles. It's just incredible sometimes. But then as you get closer to that 4, 5, and 6 year mark, then you're going to have that consolidation of that white feathering on the head. You're going to have that white tail, and also on the face, you'll notice that the beak turns that yellow color, as do the eyes, which go from that brown in that first year of life to really that translucent yellow color that an adult bald eagle is known for. So it's a very long process, and really what it is by the time that a bald eagle reaches adulthood in that 5 to 6 year time frame, once they have that plumage, that look that we are most familiar with, that is an outward sign to the rest of the population that I am a sexually mature adult, and come the next nesting season, now I am ready to take a mate, build a nest, or find and take over a nest and start raising my own young. So really that's what it is. It is a natural indicator telling the rest of the population whether or not you are a sexually mature individual.
We're talking with Ed Hahn here today. He is Director of Advancement and Marketing Communications with the National Eagle Center here on the Lake Superior podcast. Ed, the National Eagle Center has this real focus on education and knowledge. You have a couple of live eagles at the center. Why are they there, and how does that tie into the mission of what you do at the center?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely correct. We are very honored and privileged to be the caretakers for a total of 6 raptors, but 4 of whom are bald eagle ambassadors. And so we have 2 that are with us because they have permanent wing injuries and are unable to fly, and 2 of those individuals also have permanent eye injuries on their left side and are blind in their left eye. So those 2 types of injuries really preclude them from being able to survive and hunt successfully out in the wild on their own. Now, kind of people always say, well, what's the process? Do they, somebody finds an injured eagle and they just bring him to the National Eagle Center? No, far from it. There really is a process that goes into it. And so we'll kind of give you an example of that. We'll go with our senior ambassador who Frida met, which would be Ambassador Angel. Now, she is a 28-year-old female, and she was hatched in northern Wisconsin and must have, in some incident, fallen out of her nest, and much too early. She was nowhere near ready to fly or fledge, and she wasn't even fully grown at that point. And so she fell out of the nest, broke her right wing, and basically somehow, through sheer force of will and determination, survived on the ground by dragging herself across the ground to fish scraps that were falling out of a nearby heron rookery. Now, the DNR, or U.S. Fish and Wildlife, came and recovered her probably a few weeks after that happened. And the reason they know it was a few weeks was by the time they rescued her and took her to the University of Minnesota Raptor Center, when they did the x-rays on that wing, they could see that the wing was already starting to naturally mend itself. Incorrectly, but it was starting to actually, the bone was starting to fuse together. And so what they did there was they rebroke the bone, set the bone properly, and allowed it to heal. Now, if you look at Angel today, because they did that procedure and set the bone properly, she looks to be a picture-perfect eagle. But the underlying story is that she suffered that wing damage at a very important part of her development. Like I said, when they're in the nest, they're growing and developing very quickly. They're going from being hatched and about the size of a baseball. 12 weeks later, they are the size of their parents. And so during that time, they, all of their musculature and things like that are forming and developing. And so the fact that she suffered this catastrophic wing injury, couldn't really use that wing, couldn't exercise it in the nest like you'll see eagles in the nest doing as they prepare to fledge. That was detrimental because she never was able to develop the muscles in that wing the way that she needed to. And so she is physically incapable of sustaining flight. If you were to try to fly Angel, she may fly 6-8 feet and then she would land again. She just cannot sustain flight. So when you have a bird like Angel that is rescued and goes to a rehab facility, those veterinarians and rehabbers will do everything they can with the goal of getting that bird back out into the wild and living where we all want them to be. But the final stage of that rehab is to do some diagnostic tests and just make sure, okay, is this eagle going to be able to survive? Are they able to engage in all the activities that they need to survive? Certainly flying is foremost among them. And if that bird can't pass those tests, then it becomes a situation where they have to find a permanent house or housing or caretaker for that bird, because obviously the only other alternative would be, euthanasia. Nobody really wants that. And so rehabbers do put out the call on a national network. And of course you have everything from, falconers, aviaries, Native American tribes, zoos, nature centers. They're kind of all out there. And they may be looking to bring in an eagle as part of their operation, whether it's for falconry purposes or ceremonial purposes with Native Americans or just general education. But that goes out there on this network. It's almost it's very similar to human adoption, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. And so that starts this process of finding a facility that is looking to acquire a bird, Then you have to have discussions of, okay, would it be a good fit? In the case of what we have here at the center, like I said, 2 of our ambassadors have eye injuries. Well, that is a type of injury that we have a lot of experience working with here at the National Eagle Center. So if we are in a position where we're looking to acquire another ambassador for our team, and a bird becomes available that has an eye injury, that would typically mean okay, that might be a better match just because the caretaking team, the Eagle Care team that they have at the National Eagle Center has experience working with that. But anyway, you go through all these steps, and then you try to find the right fit, the right match. Of course, there's also a priority order on there, too, so somebody might be waiting a lot longer than somebody else, and so they're going to have first dibs, and so on and so forth. And then kind of the final portion of that is whoever the veterinarians are going to be working with that facility, and in our case at the National Eagle Center, we work directly with the University of Minnesota Raptor Center. They would take a look at all of the medical records for that bird. They would make an assessment and say, yep, we would be, perfectly willing to care for this bird, knowing its situation and its needs, and et cetera, et cetera. Or they might say, no, this wouldn't be a good fit, and they might nix it. But that's a process. It is a very lengthy process, but there's a lot of steps to it. And of course, caring for bald eagles, especially in this country, they are protected by 2 levels of federal law, so there's a lot of permitting involved. And all of those boxes need to be checked, and things need to be, run through the proper channels and gone through the proper procedures in order to finally house and place an injured bald eagle. So it is quite a lengthy process, and as we always tell our guests here at the center, again, we're honored and privileged to be able to care for the eagles that we care for here at the National Eagle Center, but just like everyone else, we truly do wish that they could be living their full lives as intended as wild eagles out in the wild. It's only because they have permanent injuries that we are able to even have them in our possession, living at our facility. And the nature of our federal permits is such that we can't keep those birds privately. We have to work with them to educate the public, and we have to be sharing those birds with the public. So that is a huge part of the stipulations and the permitting that allows us to even be the caretakers of the birds that we care for here at the center.
And it is so remarkable when you get to be at the center and you look at Angel, and she's big. Walt, she's really big. I mean, to be, I guess I was probably about 6 feet away from this huge eagle, and the opportunity that you have. Hats off to Ed and all your staff there for all the education that you provide, because you can spend all day at the National Eagle Center. There's just so much to learn and lots of great trivia questions. I love it. I was just soaking that up because I have to, my 10-year-old granddaughter needs to know all these details about eagles. But Ed, how can our listeners learn more about the National Eagle Center? How can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. We are certainly online. We have a social media presence. We are both on Facebook and Instagram, National Eagle Center. We post regularly on that. We are also on YouTube. We have a National Eagle Center channel on YouTube. And of course, if they want to come learn about the center and learn about the different programming that we offer or ways that they can support us, they can certainly go to our website, which is nationaleaglecenter.org.
Ed, I got to ask you this real quick before we cut you loose here today. As you were learning about eagles, as you said, you came into this line of work sort of on kind of a fluke, a whim, a little, a wing and a prayer. Was there something about that, like a thing that you learned about eagles that kind of surprised you?
Oh man, I mean, we could talk for another hour if you wanted to. I mean, there's always new things to learn about eagles, and that's actually, I would say, I'm not part of directly part of the education team that we have here at the center, but I do interact with a lot of our guests. I do provide tours to travel planners or things like that, or people like Frida who come through the center as well.
Sure.
And one of the most interesting aspects of the work we do here is everyone, generally speaking, speaking, has some kind of an interest in eagles or raptors, especially bald eagles because they are our national symbol and our national bird. They are majestic to look at. But it really also speaks to the fascination that humans have had with birds in general, and especially raptors, but really going back to the dawn of civilization. But everyone has a different thing that they want to learn about. There's a different aspect of the animal that they are keen to gain better understanding of, or maybe they have experiences that they've encountered eagles out in the wild and they want to share their stories. But everyone has a unique approach to it, and that always keeps the educational side of it very fresh, but it also keeps it very fun because you're also learning about the person at the same time that you're teaching them about the bird, if that makes any sense.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I would say, one of the things that I've seen time and again in my time here and interacting with our guests is that bald eagles, in a sense, are not – they're very deceiving birds in the sense of, like Frida was saying, she goes into the room where the eagles are on display. You're just a few feet away from them in this open-air facility, and people always say, oh, my gosh, they're so big, they're so large. And, of course, people would say that because for 99% of people that come to the center, they have never been that close to a bald eagle, and probably never will be again. And so when you see them that close, yeah, they're very big. And so you'll start talking to them, and they'll say, well, how much do they weigh? And our favorite game among our education staff here is to kind of turn that around and say, well, what would you guess? Just to look at one of our ambassadors. Let's say you're looking at Angel. You're looking at Angel. What would you guess that she weighs? And this is always funny and fun because it depends on who you are asking the question. We might have kindergartners who come in, they're 100 pounds. And of course, they just came out of a program where an eagle handler had an eagle on their glove for about 10 minutes. Like, wow, 100 pounds. They must really be quite the bodybuilder. But a lot of times you'll get more common guesses will be, 30 pounds, 40 pounds, sometimes 50 pounds. And what people are doing is they are looking at the bird and they're assessing it. And a lot of people have said this to me. They're like, oh, golly, it kind of looks about maybe the same size as the turkey we had for Thanksgiving. Mm. And so the best part is the big reveal because unless they've come here before or know something about eagles, you'll look at them and say, well, Angel weighs about 10.5 pounds. And they're just like, what? What? That's crazy. That's incredible. And so why I said they're deceiving is because when you look at a bald eagle, really what you're seeing are the feathers. And bald eagles are covered in approximately 7,000 feathers. Now, those feathers have different purposes. Some of them are to help actually give the bird its shape. Those are called the contour feathers. Then there's the feathers on their tail and their wings. Those are the flight feathers that are helping them literally, create lift and soar through the air. And then underneath all of those feathers is you have these little white downy feathers. And those are the feathers that keep them warm, especially in the winter. They're very, very good at being insulation. They also help repel water and things of that nature. And so you have these 7,000, odd feathers on this bird. And one of my favorite facts is that if you were to have a scale and you took all of the feathers off a bald eagle and you put it on one side of the scale, and you took the skeleton of that eagle and you put it on the other side of the scale, their feathers weigh more than their skeleton. Wow. And that truly blows people's minds. Now, then you start to go down, the rabbit hole with them a little and say, well, you have to be lightweight to fly. I mean, and we probably don't think about that a lot, but we see examples of that through everyday life. I mean, you see balloons floating outside, or obviously, if you throw a rock up in the air, it's not just going to float away because they're dense, they're heavy. They're more dense than air. And so once you start to go through that with people, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. One of the great, things about birds in general, or one of the surprising facts, is all their bones are hollow. They have a kind of a lattice structure that helps, reinforce the bones from the interior, but they're unlike mammalian bones like you and I have, that are basically full of material all the way through with the marrow in the center. And so, yeah, that's always it's a real shocker for a lot of people because they look at these birds and they know they're tough, they know they're strong, and they're standing a few feet away from them, and they're these big, imposing birds a lot of times. but they really don't weigh that much, and that's what kind of leads into one of our one of our favorite things to set the record straight on. You have a lot of people will come in, and there's just this public kind of wanting this to be true, but they say, "Oh yeah, they'll carry away dogs and cats," and we're like, "Oh, okay, really? Do you know somebody whose cat was taken away by an eagle? Do you have pictures of this bald eagle nest that had all these dog collars in it?" And we've never had anyone that has ever been able to substantiate the story, but it's basically these urban legends that are out there that bald eagles snatch animals. The truth of the matter is, sure, they may catch things like rabbits, squirrels. They're obviously hunting fish. But they have to be pretty small animals. They really cannot weigh that much because in order to sustain flight, a bald eagle can't carry much more than a third of its own body weight. So if you look at a bird like Angel, where she's 10.5 pounds, you really can't carry much more than 3 pounds max. And most cats, most dogs are going to be more than 3 pounds. And I can also tell you just from my own anecdotal experience watching the river out the windows of the Eagle Center, I have seen eagles dive down and grab a fish that is too heavy to fly back to shore.
In
which case you literally see kind of the gears turning in the eagle's head in real time, where they're thinking, okay, do I want to let this fish go and have to risk lunch, or do I not want to let it go? And then they end up in the water, and they quickly become waterlogged. They can swim, but they'll have to swim it back to shore. But again, the point being, they can even catch fish which are too heavy for them to carry back, and that is, again, because the bird itself is very lightweight.
Ed, for a guy that didn't know much about eagles when you got into the line of work, you certainly know plenty. But I appreciate, we appreciate you sharing this with us here today. And again, real quick, the website for the National Eagle Center for folks to find out a little bit more, because there is much more to go. But if they want to find out more about what you do and some of the resources you have for them, what is that website?
That is nationaleaglecenter.org.
Ed Hahn with us here today on the Lake Superior podcast, talking about the National Eagle Center and eagles. Ed, thank you for your time this afternoon, and thank you for your time with us, sharing all this good info.
Oh my goodness!
Well, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to talk, and obviously I like to talk about eagles, so it's an absolute pleasure to share some facts with you today.
Ed Hahn, the Director of Advancement and Marketing Communications for the National Eagle Center. And I think that it was just some really fascinating information. But the biggest thing for me, Frida, was he's absolutely right. Like when I was young, if you saw an eagle, it was really something. And now, by living on the shores of Lake Superior and living in the Upper Peninsula, and you see them. I mean, you'll go to the beach in Marquette or somewhere along the way, or up in Copper Harbor. They're there, right? And that's a credit to efforts like what's been done at the National Eagle Center for us to have these eagles and have these wonderful birds representing what they do out there for us to see.
And the National Eagle Center is also a great place you can bring the kids and grandma and grandpa. I'm an example. I loved the information that I was learning, and great examples of also what he was sharing about the size of the nest and the size of the birds and how much they can carry. And it's a really good place. So make that stop if you're heading everywhere. For me, I was in Rochester, Minnesota. So the Wabasha is about an hour east, right on the river. And when you get a little landlocked in some of those towns in the interior of Minnesota, I got to go listen to Moving Water, and Wabasha is a great place to do that.
That is at the National Eagle Center. That was Ed Hahn joining us here today. That's pretty much going to do it here for us on the podcast. But if you've got an idea that you want to hear us talk about, find us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. We'll be able to move on and looking for some of those items and just see what ends up coming up that maybe we'll just forget it on the next episode of the Lake Superior podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.